So I'm here with Shannon Hoff, who is associate professor of philosophy at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, and she's the author of this book, "The Laws of the Spirit: A Hegelian Theory of Justice." And she's an expert in political philosophy and feminism and continental philosophy. And so I was going to just talk with her today about uh, the ways in which she has found phenomenology and deconstruction to be relevant to her work. So, well, first, actually, Shannon, I mentioned this book, but you have another one that you're working on. Can you tell us, just in a few words, what your new book is going to be about?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, my experience in philosophy has always been the experience of being a woman in philosophy. And it's, it was sort of hard, I found, in, my beginning my philosophical education to sort of ignore the fact that I was a woman, because it affected, how I felt in the context of a philosophy class and so on. But more broadly, like I've always been, ever since a very young age, I've found myself needing to be a feminist. And I've always been interested in philosophical questions. So I've always been involved in feminism, involved in thinking about, issues that I faced because I was a woman. And I've always been involved in philosophy. And at some point, I decided, well, I kind of want to write a book about that. I kind of want to write a book about feminism, which is something that I'm personally and theoretically involved in. And I kind of want to make that book be about the powerful insights that the tradition of philosophy that I am involved in can bring to feminist questions, using them as potential allies. And the idea there too was, just because a bunch of men, traditional men in philosophy, might have said a couple of nasty things about women or unfortunate things about women, doesn't mean that the powerful things they say shouldn't be harnessed for the sake of feminist political political commitment. So it seemed nonsense to let those insights go untapped, to not, it seems important also to take the philosophical tradition and the powers and resources that it has and rewrite it for political issues that are important for us, for a new political era, in a sense, for a new political generation and set of concerns. And there's nothing saying we can't do that just because these guys were like associated with it, colonialism, with sexism, with patriarchy, and so on. Let's use them to talk about these very important new political concerns we might have.
Yeah, that's great. I know the cat was very interested in that. I know that you talk about a lot of figures in this, or at least you're influenced by a lot of figures like Plato and Aristotle and Hegel and various others. But I want to ask you about a couple of them in particular. I wanted to ask you in particular about Heidegger and Derrida. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about each one of them, about what you have found valuable in Heidegger's phenomenology, or in what Derrida calls his deconstruction, and especially how, if there's something in those figures that you have found distinctive that's relevant for your work in political philosophy or feminism. I'm just going to try to move that cat. Oh, he's going away. Okay. Yeah. Let's do one first. Let's do Heidegger first.
Okay. Well, the thing I find, I guess, most basically compelling about Heidegger is the way he sort of captures the fact that the human being is not essentially kind of isolated and discrete. I might appear as a sort of defined individual with borders and so on. And that's really, really misleading about who I am. That doesn't tell the truth of who I am. So Heidegger, like people before him, especially Hegel, in my that's who I'm wrapped up in, really does a good job of capturing the ways in which human beings extend beyond themselves and are only understandable by reference to the stuff outside of them. So, he talks about this issue of human beings being sort of unreflectively absorbed in their environments with their stuff, and such that to be me is always to be engaged with things, engaged with objects, engaged with space, engaged with, the specificities of that space and that environment. But beyond that, or there's a huge aspect of that insight that Heidegger has, and that is this issue of world. To be an individual is to be inside of a world that's constituted in a certain way, where people think of things, think about reality in a certain way. People have a certain kind of orientation to the objective world, the natural world. We already have views, in a sense, that kind of precede us. So the way we have of seeing people, the way we have of seeing things, the way we have of us, seeing ourselves, is in a sense developed before we are. We're cultivated to be certain kinds of beings by the environment in which we live, the world in which we live, and so that our views aren't due to us as individuals. We find ourselves thinking and being and acting in certain ways because of this, because of our upbringing, because of our situation in a particular culture. So Heidegger really captures that really forcefully, I think, and gives the lie to our character, what seems to be our character as individuals.
Can I ask you about that? So
yeah.
How have you thought about using that notion of world from Heidegger in a political or feminist context?
Well, one of the issues for feminism is, are there any, one of the questions for feminism is, are there any sort of feminist issues or feminist standards that are universal? Right? So, and how can a feminist be oriented toward the women in a different world and concerned about those women? And to what extent is that concern legitimate? Or, does a feminist sort of transgress against the women of a different world if she's concerned about them, And, in a sense, what we get from Heidegger is a real sense of the limit between one world and another. There's a meaningfulness, a logic to specific worlds that you have to try to do justice to. So a feminist shouldn't just say, "Oh, look at the women in that other culture, aren't they being so mistreated?" and so on, because prior to the attempt to actually discern the meaningfulness, the internal meaningfulness of that world, that would be a really hubristic and aggressive kind of gesture.
Right. So in other words, just going back to what you were saying before about sort of unreflective material practices and so on. So your point then is that the things that someone from the outside looks at as a kind of oppressive thing may actually be some kind of a functional part of some larger system of participating in a world. And in other words, you can't really judge the meaning of that particular practice without knowing how it functions in the world it belongs to.
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Exactly. Yes. So just like an individual is not, strictly speaking, an individual isolated and discrete, so also any particular practice is not just an isolated and discrete practice, but is caught up in a world in which it has a certain role to play. And one doesn't understand the practice if one doesn't understand its relation to what is external to it.
So in other words, okay, so then
within
I guess
that world.
Yeah. So in that way, I guess the point would be that what Heidegger Heidegger is accomplishing then is really changing the terms, or changing the place you have to look to analyze something, and therefore changing in a way the terms of political analysis.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Against these kind of putatively universal notions that would allow you to judge someone from the outside, and more towards an interpretation of the way practices work within some cultural system or something like that.
Right. And exactly. And but that's not to say that we don't also have the possibility of grasping truths about human beings as such. Because, for instance, being in the world is a condition that each of us lives in terms of. It's just that the worlds we live in are articulated differently.
Mm-hmm.
But being in, right, dwelling, this is a universal characteristic of human beings. It just means that we can say about ourselves that we're essentially different because our dwelling places are different. Yeah. Being with is an essential aspect, and that's where the notion of world makes sense. Like you're inducted into humanity by other human beings. You are essentially being with, and each human being is essentially being with. But that means that, human beings are defined by different kinds of people, different kinds of communities, and that means they're going to be dwell in different ways.
Yeah. Let me ask you, maybe now, if you can take this into Derrida, maybe you could say a little bit about whether there's an idea or set of ideas or whatever from. I'll let this guy go past. Whether there's an idea or a set of ideas from Derrida that you have found particularly important, and again, if wonder if there's a way that could be related to issues in feminism or political philosophy.
The idea in Derrida that I find probably most exciting is his understanding or his analysis of an identity. Whatever kind of identity it is. So, to be me, there's a kind of overarching unity to who I am. There's an overarching kind of generality, and yet that overarching generality or unity is never the thing that you see when you look at me. You just see me saying something, me doing something, me being me in a particular way on a particular day, a moment, right? Yet that moment, that presence, is an actualization of something that is also real, in a sense, this thing that outstrips and lies beyond whatever thing I'm doing in any particular day. So an identity is a kind of tension between what is actual in the now, what is made present, and what is absent. The past, the future, the sense I have of my possibilities, my plans, my pursuits, my desires, my dreams, my orientation, my interpretation of the world, and so on. So, you can't just imagine that you're capturing someone or something if you capture a moment of it, but you can't also imagine that the thing as such is available to you beyond the moment. So
Well, so is there a way to relate that idea about this sort of tension between the sort of the identity and the particular ways it's being realized? Cats, children, is there a way to relate that idea of a kind of tension that defines our identity between the sort of core sense of who you are that's never actually realized on its own, and then these particular forms of realization? Is there a way to relate that to feminism or political philosophy?
Yeah, I think so. Any political movement at any sort of moment has a kind of view of what its issues are and what it must do and has to engage in something, in doing something. Feminism, for instance, might have a particular sense of, at any given moment, of who women are, or what issues of injustice face that need to be addressed, and it must, in a sense, do that, do something, it must be something, it must pursue something, make a judgment about a situation, and in a sense, it must also question those judgments. It may at a later point in the story find itself answerable to other claims about it that it is unjust. So for instance, feminism has always found has found itself answerable to critics about it. Critics saying about it that it has advanced a particular notion of woman that is exclusive or exclusionary, that it has, enacted a kind of gesture on behalf of justice that is in fact unjust from the point of view of a different kind of view or a different perspective, and good, it should be accountable in that way, but it also, can't resist answering the question, what is just, and pursuing the issue of just action and just decision.
Hey, you're not allowed to sit on my white chair.
Okay, you can take the chair. I won't sit on the chair.
No, I'll take it away.
Yeah, let me carry it over here for you. Can you squeeze underneath that?
Minor interruption.
There you go. Okay. It's true. It is his chair. But so you're right. So the point then is that on the one hand, feminism has to fix on something specific, some interpretation of what woman is, in order to be feminism and in order to do anything. And yet, one also has to recognize that momentary, or not momentary exactly, but that sort of finite sense of what woman is it really adequate to the deep, isn't adequate by itself to the deeper projects it's involved in, which is something about justice.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's a way of a movement always sort of positing a standard for it that it could fail. Movements such as feminism, political movements like that, are oriented toward the goal of justice, and justice will never in a sense be closed. So on, in the pursuit of justice, feminism could find itself answerable to justice in a way that it has failed.
Yep. Are there any other things about phenomenology or deconstruction in particular that you would specially draw people's attention to? I suppose the spirit, in a sense, of these philosophical orientations is to me, to just register the richness of the world as it reveals itself to us, around us, So it's kind of I kind of see it as an invitation to look more closely at the everyday, and to be sort of excited by the project of doing that, and to be excited at the richness that lies underneath the everyday. What is an action? What is a person? What is a bicycle? It's such an enormous reality. If you think about
think about what lies behind it and below it. So in a sense, I think that phenomenology and deconstruction and, with it German idealism and, and so on, allows us to be, in a sense, excited about the richness that lies all around us, like to be able to see it better, to be able to look at an identity, at a thing, and see its history, see its role in a kind of interpersonal network, to see how it's an expression of a world, to see how it mediates between people, constituting their interaction differently, So that's sort of a vague answer, and probably one could give that answer to any particular tradition in philosophy. But yeah, to return to the thing I was saying about Heidegger, you're not just you, and it's kind of exciting to find that out, and to have one's attention drawn to the richness of realities that sort of announce themselves as discrete individuals.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mentioned Shannon's book. I'll mention two other things. She has a great essay on Heidegger called Rights and Worlds, an essay on Derrida called Translating Principle into Practice. Is that right? And those are excellent essays that very, very much address these kinds of themes. So thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.